Test mic 1, 2, 3. Kenny, can you confirm if audio is still dead?
People are saying there's no audio. Hello, Andre.
Andre,
Hello,
Mitch,
Mitch.
do confirm if you can hear audio.
I switched the mic to the laptop instead of the camera. There's something wrong with the. I don't always get it. Okay, so Andre hears. Okay, that's good. Jay also. Okay, so it's the mic. It's the camera mic. It's not always getting detected. I have the same problem at work when I use it for uh, Google Meet.
Or we just really need to get the driver.
Yeah, but then
Maybe
I.
it's that. Maybe it's just, it's not optimal because it's not using the driver.
But Chipper, Microsoft should still be able to detect driver status, and then it's saying it's updated.
Yeah, but, you know, there's a difference between a specific driver and the other driver. Anyway, I think we have enough to officially get started. I'm just about to switch to my timer. Oh man, I charged this for the whole day. It's only 70%. Well, the whole day I wasn't using it, which was like 5 o'clock onwards.
So yeah, that's not super long, but it's also an older iPad that you really need to replace.
Everything. I need to replace everything. All right, we'll be starting after this opening title sequence.
Oh yeah! Really great!
Hello, everyone. This is Toby.
And this is Rocky.
And if it's your first time here, welcome to Baduy Pride, our little space on the internet where we talk about anything we want.
It's completely unscripted and not entirely accurate, but at least it's honest. Join us as we talk about everything and anything random live.
And if it's not your first time here, thank you so much for joining us again. This is episode 233, and it's about a show we really love.
Yes, so we're going to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender, and well, at least when we were mapping the topics out, we'll try to focus first on the first series because Korra is a whole different story
Mhm.
and probably deserves an episode of its own, but we'll see how far that goes. But yeah, so we're going to talk about Avatar, the first Avatar.
So, part of the interesting thing, I guess, kismet to some extent, was that we thought of covering this topic. And within the next few days, there was the announcement of the quick start release for the upcoming role playing game.
Yeah, so there is an upcoming official tabletop RPG that is powered by the Apocalypse. I've already downloaded the quick start. It looks interesting, and I like that. I like that. What you call this? That bending is not essential to character creation. So
Mhm.
bending is just another form of training or discipline that characters can get in that game. So you could choose to not be a bender, which is valid, which is totally valid. And it's not like Monster Heart C where it's like it's the helpless human
Mhm.
things like that.
For those who are also accustomed to the show, you're probably noticing the look is very different. And yes, it's because we're trying out the new camera. We're still fiddling with the lights. We're finding our way in this new setup.
Lights. Toby's second light has arrived. We have two ring lights in the living
But
room.
look, we have such nice lighting with soft shadows. And our skin tone actually looks skin tone.
It looks a little better than yesterday's harsh one light setup, so I guess it's a little better. But I don't know. I should take behind the scenes photos of what the setup looks like now. It's kind of funny.
So let's get talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a action adventure fantasy series that was it has a colorful past and where it was released, right? Because there was the Nickelodeon release, and then there's the movie we do not talk about,
Oh, okay. That's what you meant. It's like it's always been Nickelodeon. Why? Where else would it be? And like,
and
okay.
then in many ways the comics sort of act like a continuation of the series.
Yes.
Unlike in most media wherein comics tend to be like other stories or side stories. Avatar: The Last Airbender used comics as a
Eh,
means to continue the
and it starts with
series.
this one, which is The Promise, which is a whole other thing. Okay, so but yeah, so things we can dive into.
Mhm.
Jay's like, there is no movie. And then for a moment we were tempted to bring out the game, but then
Mhm.
the game that we have is technically a Korra game and
Yes.
not a Last Airbender game. So I guess it'll have to wait for another episode.
So Avatar is a series that focuses on a group of youngsters who become heroes in their own right. It starts with the journey of 12-year-old Aang, who is one of the last few, and I'm only using terms very loosely for those who haven't seen the show, members of the Air Nomads.
Yeah, well, basically the title tells you that as far as he knows, he is the last Airbender,
Mhm.
and he is discovered frozen in ice, just like Captain America. But in this case, by two members of the water bending tribe, the Southern water bending tribe,
That's
which is
Katara and Sokka.
yes, and Soka is so. In this case, benders for those who have never seen the series so far. So benders are those who can manipulate a particular element.
Mhm.
So water benders, by the name, are able to manipulate water and many of its related forms,
Mhm.
whereas the air benders or the air nomads can manipulate air. Um, and the whole thing, if once you've watched a few episodes and you've gone through the title sequence at least thrice, then you're gonna get very very used to the setting because the opening title sequence for Avatar is a very efficient exposition device
Mhm.
where it tells us that there are four nations, which is like based around classic elements, and there are people who can bend those elements of earth, fire, water, air, and
Mhm.
then well,
Everything changed.
everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Um, and
and and that intro immediately sets the expectation that in the show the Fire Nation is the antagonist.
mm,
They're the ones with the ambitions, the ones with the desire to bring order in their own way across the land by taking over it. The other nations, of course, become part of the storyline because um, hence the title Avatar. The Avatar was someone who supposedly has mastered all the elements.
yes,
And when Aang is thrust into this understanding, he realizes he has to learn them because all he knows at the start of the show
is
is
airbending.
airbending.
Yeah, so he has the capability
Mhm.
to manipulate all four elements, but he doesn't know. And there's a whole story about what happened and why he was frozen in ice and all these things. But now it's like it's up to him to master all four elements and find a way to save the world from the Fire Nation.
Now the show stretched on for 3 seasons with over 60 episodes, 61 to be more specific. In the span of its life, it won 5 Annie Awards, a Genesis Award, a Primetime Emmy Award, a Kids' Choice Award, and a Peabody Award, which makes it, in many ways, considered as one of the greatest television shows of all time, given the wide range of awards it has received. I feel though that this viewpoint is also because it's an animated show. It's one thing for, let's say, a news show or a documentary show to get awards, but
Mm-mm.
for people to consider what a cartoon won all these awards is what makes it all the more special.
So, why do you think it was such a? Why did it click so much? And it came out in an interesting time. I think we covered it briefly when we were going over cartoons of the early
Mm-hmm.
2000s, and this debuted in 2005,
Mm-hmm.
which is a fair amount of time ago. And I remember I was already working in 2005,
Yeah.
so then it was like it was not the best time for me to try to watch a cartoon
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't have time to watch cable TV and all these things.
Now, part of the charm of the show is it's a show that does not shy away from the fact that it's a cartoon. So you still have a lot of comical moments, you still
Mm.
have a lot of wild action, of zany humor. But at the same time, it doesn't talk down to its audience. It touches on topics of war, genocide, of totalitarianism, of free choice, of even faith and of friendship without trying to dumb it down into super simple, simplified black and white concepts.
Yeah, it's not Nick Jr. It's still
Mhm.
Nickelodeon. And I think the themes were definitely surprisingly mature.
Mhm.
And it's not going to, and it didn't paint things in absolutes either. And I love the arc, the fact that, because eventually Aang has to get around to learning how to master fire,
Mhm.
and it's such an antithesis to sort of what he's been doing, and the fact that he's been trying to escape from or face the Fire Nation for so long. Um, Made this an interesting journey for, like, okay, then how is he going to get around to dealing with this? And again, the whole bending thing was not just a skill in itself, but it was also a mastery of mindsets,
Mhm.
of beliefs, and really imbibing what each element represented.
Now, you're just going through the questions real quick. Um, Mitch was asking, what is the Genesis Award? So that is an award annually given by the Humane Society of the United States to individuals in the major news and entertainment media for producing outstanding works which raise the public awareness on animal
Isn't
issues.
that interesting?
Yeah.
Because, and it's funny because Avatar is notoriously known for its strange fantasy
Mhm.
animals that are always like mashups of others,
Mhm.
like those turtle ducks and all these things. But yeah, it won an award for depiction of animal stories.
Andre has been citing a lot of statements currently. I like that it was mature enough for kids. I'm a bit confused by that statement. Um, and then he also mentions, I like there are subtleties that are serious topics told in a way that kids will have a bit of understanding for it. Okay. And that's true. The show did not shy away from showing how dark and how destructive war can be.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it did not do what most shows did, which was, the people doing the war, oh, that's because they're evil and that's because they're bad. End of story. They still tried to show that it came from a place of, in some cases, ambition, in some cases, selfishness, but in some cases, it was desperation because they wanted to protect themselves or they wanted to make themselves stand in a better standing in life.
Yeah, I think that was best personified by the fact that they could have just ended it. I mean, in terms of like crafting the story, it could have just been, okay, Aang and his friends are now going to travel the world as he learns bending, and that's it. But
Mhm.
no, they had to give us a lot of focus on initially what was, we figured was the straight up villain antagonist.
Mhm.
You had Prince Zuko traveling around with his Fire Nation forces,
Mhm.
determined to catch the Avatar, and his only companion was his uncle Iroh, who initially we find out was like a great general, but that's about it. Um, but then we find out why Zuko is hell bent on
Mhm.
finding Aang. Is that in the end he's just trying to prove himself to his father. It's that classic story of a son seeking, the respect and approval of his parents, and
Mhm.
his obsession with it drives him to this mission, but even though it may be against like who he is as a person,
Mhm.
and that gave us an interesting lens to view the entire adventure.
Now, what makes the show even more awesome was the fact that the show did not waste time in finding ways to give every character some level of character growth.
Mm.
Katara, who starts out as the waterbender of her tribe, um, at first is extremely a pacifist, does not like violence, does not believe her abilities should be used in any combative way, but later on learns to become a more competent warrior in the sense of protecting those she cares for. Sokka, who has no bending ability,
But he has a
interestingly,
boomerang.
yeah, but interestingly, he in many ways echoes the journey that Aang goes through.
Mm.
Because as Aang learns the bending abilities of each nation, Sokka learns the fighting styles of each nation. And in many ways, they become sort of like, they complete each other in that way.
Mm.
He allows them to see the different nations under the cultural lens, while Aang approaches it in the spiritual or the mystical lens. You have Zuko, who has one of the best. transformative arcs as far as narratives are concerned, um, which includes changing the look.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
as much as it's a trope in many shows we're in, now it's evil. He'll have a goatee. Here we had the complete opposite of. Um,
He grows his hair.
he grows his hair. He looks better, despite the scarring and all that. And it was such a meaningful arc because it wasn't just I now have friends and I care. There were still moments of betrayal. There were still moments of self doubt.
And there's still he never quite shook off his desire to. I mean, at least for most of the arc, his encounters with his father were very complex and
Mm.
nuanced and heavy. And if anyone has ever had concerns with a parent and like how to deal with that relationship as you grow older,
Mm.
it was instantly relatable for many.
And then you have
Toph.
Toph, who was the blind earthbender, who, in my case, was one of my favorites.
Oh, obviously, she's a delight.
She's a delight because she has no filter. She's very honest about how protective and covered up and defensive she can be, but at the same time, she can see through things because of the way she's blind, and it's such an exploration of contrasts that makes the concept so well done.
Okay. Kenny's like the character development is great and little to no one dimensional characters.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean like at best you have people like the cabbage cart selling person, but he was just a very effective running gag.
He was one dimensional in that way, but he was such a fun trope he was such a fun gag that he became a trope for the series.
Yes.
And it's a good thing when something becomes a trope within the series itself.
Both Tristan and Andre cite that again. They also say that Zuko was definitely one of the best arcs.
Now, Azula, what can you say about Azula?
Well, one, she's a very late character, so sorry for people who don't want us to go that far to talk about characters. But
Mhm.
Azula's very complex also,
Mm.
and in the sense that, what's this? You can understand how she and Zuko are siblings because they both come from troubled upbringing, and how it manifests is very different in the two siblings.
It was a nice show of how you could have gone these different ways
Yes.
from the same traumatic moment. Now, the show was also remarkable, and in some ways, this was part of why I loved it more than Korra.
Mm.
In how it made sure the elemental bending styles were very distinct. Earth bending was based on Honggar Kung Fu, according to IMDb. Fire bending was Northern Shaolin Kung Fu. Water bending was Tai Chi. And air bending was Bagwazang. Bagwazang.
And I love this too, that it felt like there was
A distinct.
a deliberateness,
Yeah.
an almost science to the bending,
Mhm.
that the motions, because they followed different martial arts styles, had a very distinct flavor to them, at
Mm.
least in Avatar The Last Airbender. And we only say because the show went in different directions in the later ones.
Yeah.
But at least in this first show, it's super, super distinct and so much part of the character that earth movements are strong and rigid.
And a lot of downward slams and thrusts because it was going back to the earth, at least as far as they were trying to depict it. Because we know there were real world representations or analogies that they were drawing from that were not necessarily the same element, so to
Mm.
speak. But they chose the right motions to help enhance the feeling you wanted.
Yeah.
So one can say, what makes um, what makes kung fu fire, because you're just throwing punches. But then how they did it in the show, and it felt like that acceleration then releases the flames, was just a nice touch.
And it's a lot of push
Mm.
from the arms and stuff. And then even if there were kicks, they were full extension,
Mm.
outward. Because again, it was always like they wanted the motion to continue and then like the fire to come out as if it was flowing through. Whereas water was a lot of redirection because it's Tai Chi. Then it's a lot of redirection and interconnected movement. So that definitely works out.
Now, some trivia: Cabbage Man was not originally meant to be a recurring character, but due to the fan response, the writers found it so comedic they decided to make him a running gag in the series.
It was, and I totally see how that could happen. Like, it was obviously not meant to be, because it starts out like the classic movie trope where there is a car chase and there's always like fresh produce on the side of the
Mhm.
road that the car is gonna swing into, or maybe two people walking with a pane of glass or wood and then it will break. Those movie tropes,
Mhm.
and I'm sure it was along those lines. But then, like many things about the show, because it was charming, endearing, delightful. Then he just kept coming back, and we love them all the more for it. Okay.
Um, so what else can we talk about in the show? Because again, now we're falling into the trap of, are we gonna spoil it for people who haven't seen it? I say it might as well, because it's the show already has a second show, and
But we'll try not to go too deep, I guess. So, like Andre cited, some of their best episodes for him is like where they showed their time in Ba Sing Se, the city, the Earth Kingdom city,
Mhm.
as well as, I would just say, the Appa episode. And I think that was, and you can tell that the show is doing well when they get to be able to do episodes like that were from non-primary cast members, and the
Mhm.
fact that there were some that involved their animal companions like Appa and Momo. Um, brave stuff, brave stuff. It's right up there with like Hawkeye, the Hawkeye issue where it was featuring mostly focused on. I will still say Pizza Dog, even though
Mhm.
I know his name is Lucky, or things like that. It's like those efforts that you can expand out. Okay. Um, and then Kenny also says you can definitely see the love they put into the series and the world building. And this is interesting in the sense that, so we know that Avatar is definitely Asian inspired, but
Mhm.
never claimed to be any particular culture. There are strong inspirations and themes and motifs
Mhm.
in terms of what the depiction was, but it was not our world, and it was not, and it was not any actual Asian nation, even though like things like the Earth Kingdom definitely took a lot of inspiration from the likes of
Mhm.
in China.
And how there was Chinese calligraphy used and characters. Even the very foreign nations had direct translations in terms of the characters that were used to represent them.
Mm-mm.
Um, for example, water. The symbol for water is joined by another, and that means virtue. The one for earth meant strong, the one for fire meant fierce, and the one for air meant peaceful. So there was that added. If you were multilingual, then you would actually already get additional information that others weren't seeing.
So
Um,
it then it, I mainly cite that because I mean it was brilliantly done. It felt very respectful. But at the same time, now I wonder if it would have had the same impact if it came out like now in recent years, when people are very, very careful about
mm,
cultural depictions, and in even in fictional media, that because you're in taking inspiration from this or that, then you need to do it well. So you things come to mind, like recent things like Raya the Last Dragon, where it had obvious or very strong
inspirations drawn,
inspiration from Southeast
yeah,
Asian, countries and histories, but didn't actually depict any of them. And
specifically.
yeah, and so it was like a balancing act of, is this really enough representation?
Mhm.
Is it not, too much? I don't know,
Mhm.
whatever. So
And
the
part of
the
and part of that was, of course, there was the talk about the production staff itself being predominantly non-Asian,
mm-mm.
was a factor in some of the backlash. Um, so there is that challenge of wanting to have that creative freedom to explore and to draw inspiration from things, but at the same time to carefully watch the line and not cross over into infringement or even appropriation, especially if you're not even having people of that culture to help you. I know Raya had some point wherein there was questions about such validity, but then there were later documentations showing that they actually had teams to help with certain cultural portions as well.
Mm-mm.
So there is that feeling that you won't necessarily always please everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Then like I mean, whether or not they do the work, then there's always going to be someone who feels like you didn't do enough, or
Mhm.
somehow it's not your place, and it just gets very complicated. And if you look at the main creators of the show, who is Brian uh, Konietzko and Michael Dante DiMartino, um, they're very American. And
Mhm.
then writing an Asian inspired story. Which is not necessarily Asian. Which again, it's like if that happened in more recent years, would the reception have
Have
been the
been different.
same? I don't know. But ultimately, we can say that Avatar came out at the right time. It captured the hearts of many, and it's
Mhm.
why it's still beloved and celebrated today. Okay, so Kenny asked, if you live in the Avatar world, what bending would you like to have? Would you like to do special bending styles? Blah blah blah. Do you have a bending preference?
Hmm. I can't. Well, I definitely don't want fire.
Okay.
I don't want to use anything that distinctly has the ability or the inherentness of hurting people.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm not too keen on water
Okay.
because I feel like people will keep nagging me to help them, or someone is hurt and I have to do this again. And it will become a you can cure people. So if you say no, what kind of a person are you to say
Mm,
no to helping someone who's
there
hurt?
is that.
Which then leaves air and earth. And I think I'll slip to air only because flying is always awesome, and the ability to be very mobile is fun.
Kenny points out that you can bake with fire.
True, but then I can bake with air. I'll just make sure it's hot air. Oh, air fryer.
Oh my god! So you need a firebender with you so you can
No, I'll just
air
have
fry.
a nearby fire, but I'll like swirl the air around, and I'm like,
You know what that turns into? Dimos. Where first it was the
what would you
air and then
choose?
fire. Um, as much as I would love to claim to be like to have the personality of water to adapt and
Mm-hmm.
whatever, I know I'm probably more earth.
Mm,
Very rigid and set in my hey, you're just nodding
yeah.
and set in my ways. And the ability to create walls and
Mm.
push people away.
And
It's
that's why
like
I'll
that.
have to be air, so I can like leap away when you get annoyed by my jokes. Because suddenly there's a mountain. I'm like, ah!
I can see already how annoying this bending
Hmm.
combination would be. Okay.
Andre shares, of course, there's a difference between inspired and appropriation. Um, Avatar captured culture in a way that the art and the history that the Asian culture has lived throughout these years. That's still questionable because, admittedly, one can say, yeah, they captured it, but one might say,
It wasn't their place to capture it, which
yes,
is like what we see a lot
and that
in different
that is
circles.
a valid concern because there are people who are of the culture who are trying to tell similar stories and they get drowned out by others who are in more evident places of privilege. But
Mm-mm.
at the same time, um, I still feel I feel that the coexistence of both media can be there. It's
Yeah.
just sad that we don't see a much more prominent attempt to help each other. So there.
So I mean, we're not strongly advocating for that, but we're just saying that it is an opinion that exists,
Yeah.
and and it's valid in itself,
Mhm.
and the conversation related to proper representation, and especially when it comes to places like America, where you're talking about representation of
Mhm.
marginalized minorities, versus like we're in Asia, we are the
Yeah,
majority.
and
It's
there,
a different
yes,
thing.
exactly. The fact that the voice of the complaint, um, don't see it as a monotheistic. It's the voice of Asians,
Yeah.
but it's the voice of the Asians who are minorities in that place,
Yes.
and that is a valid concern for them to raise.
Okay.
So
Andre says he's an airbender, and then Jay says water. Okay,
um,
that works out.
another thing that made Avatar such a compelling story and setting was the fact that it had the concept of the avatar, which is throughout the ages, throughout the eras, there are people who do master the elements to this degree. And part of what they did in the show was show that when the avatar reaches that avatar state, they do connect with this long line of other people who have reached that state in the past. And in that single stroke, so many stories you can tell
But
if you
at
ever choose to explore them.
and at the same time, oh my god, the burden of weight and
Hmm.
pressure and responsibility that is borne by being the avatar. And this was constantly, explored throughout the
Hmm.
series, that you have Ang, who ultimately is still a child, and yet he has all of history looking down on him.
Hmm.
And as a person who loves Dune very much, I mean, this is very much like Bene Gesserit other
Hmm.
memory, where they have connection to all their female ancestors when they get into that protective
In
stand.
some ways, it's also like the authorities' doctor
Oh
who
yes,
connects to all the doctors
all the incarnations of the
that ever
Doctor,
did,
different from Doctor Who.
and
This is the
they
authority
all
Doctor.
judge the current one. That's what you're doing.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
and
it's like so much knowledge, but so much pressure.
beyond that, of the 61 episodes, which one do you feel was your favorite?
Oh, that's a that's a tricky conversation. Like I can't remember. I haven't it's been a while since I've last seen the
Mm.
series. It's number one, so I can't recall things very quickly. Like I don't say it's my favorite, but automatically I'm gonna start singing "Secret Tunnel." But it's just a fun episode.
I don't remember the specifics as well, but I remember the very Ghibli-esque episode with the panda forest spirit thing that was ravaging the town, and they thought it was a threat, and it turned out to be a kinder spirit.
I'm trying to remember the one.
Yes, that one.
Oh, okay, I see the one where it's featuring Hey Bai.
So it's a black and white spirit there. That was the term for it.
Okay.
And I remember really finding that one's to be super okay. They're drawing inspiration from Ghibli. It
Mm.
had that almost scary looking look, and then later on you realize, oh, it's more like a cute animal if you look at it from a different perspective.
Okay.
I'm starting to feel like Jay should have been a guest in this episode because
Okay.
he knows everything by episode.
Yeah. All right. So,
Cave of Two Lovers was the secret tunnel.
yeah. So Andre's like, yes, pressure from previous generation, living up to expectation of others. So it's really Asian. Um, uh, Black Swan points at one. Feels an earthbender. He likes the protective
Hmm.
aspect, and then yeah, he stresses that, oh my god, Aang goes through so much as an 112-year-old kid,
Hmm.
and then yeah, people citing the episode titles. But yeah, so we're probably Winter Solstice with the Panda Spirit one. Okay.
Now, another trivia element from IMDb, Zuko was actually one of the last characters to be written into the show. The Fire Lord was meant to be the show's main antagonist, but the writers realized
And we should be back. Sorry about
Zuko
that.
was written to make sure that they had a recurring threat following them around.
And it's funny because at the beginning it's like, oh my god, so the prince himself is looking for the avatar, and then you see him, on his he has a personal ship, blah blah blah, moving around and with a general with him. But then you realize, hey, Zuko's only one ship. He
Hmm.
doesn't have a fleet with him. And then when we do encounter a Fire Nation fleet, it's like, okay, there's a really big fleet, and then there are even bigger ships. So what's with Zuko on this tugboat? And that really um, was a subtle jab at like where his place was,
Hmm.
and it all just reinforced what became the overall direction of the story. Um, so Andre cites he likes the Guru, which is season 2, episode 19. He says, and then Jay says, book 3, episode 9, the Puppet Master. Love that episode too. Okay. Ooh, the blood bending was creepy though.
So, Bloodbending, the trivia.
Mm.
It was introduced in season 3 with the guest character Hama. Was originally written to be more brutal.
Ooh.
The idea was that any characters that were blood-bent would show visible pain and agony to the technique. But Nickelodeon asked for the writers to tone down the bloodbending as the idea was considered too horrific for a children's show.
And I think that's valid. I think it's totally
I'm
valid.
happy they did,
Yeah,
because I feel if they kept it super visceral, it would have just felt out of place in how the show's tone was.
that is true.
I mean, let's just be realistic. You're hitting people with earth, rocks, and columns of stone. You're responding and retaliating with bursts of fire. That shouldn't just cause bruises.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the show has always been keeping it to a certain level of realism that was
Mm-mm.
appropriate. So if they made bloodbending suddenly, let's go full anime and disturbing, scary, full Metal Alchemist levels of horrific moments, then the show would have, for me, lost its feel.
Yeah, and that's the importance of that sort of uh, this internal consistency for the
Mhm.
show. That the as much as you're dealing with fantastical powers, but the powers made sense. It had a system to it, and they were kind of balanced out. And these are all very important things addressed by what
Mhm.
good world building, as is discussed in the creative industries, and you gotta super credit the show for that. Any other interesting things you want to highlight from the IMDb page?
There's a lot of trivia actually written up that you will probably find super interesting. Like for example, in the early stages of writing, Momo, the flying lemur that acts as an animal guide to the group, was originally conceived as the reincarnation of monk Gayatso, Aang's long dead airbending mentor and friend. It would have been a reference to the Buddhist belief in reincarnation, and to show that even in death, Gyatso would always be at his side, but the idea was scrapped. I actually am happy they scrapped it.
Yeah, because
It then became a much more personal journey of seeking wisdom rather than um, the mentor was there the whole time.
and then when you go back to it, that was Aang's challenge to begin with. That
Mm,
uh, him trying to accept the need to be the avatar, and everybody, although very kindly, openly trying to guide him and teach him, it was just not too much for a kid to handle. Okay. Um, Andre cites for him most comedic moment is Sokka telling Zuko that his girlfriend was turned into the moon, and Zuko can only say, "That's rough, buddy," which I think is like a good leap to like just the humor of the
mhm.
show. I mean, like it could have been just a straight up adventure series,
Yes.
but no, it was light when it needed to be. It had some great humor. Um, on all sides of the fence. I mean, like, sure, it's the primary cast,
Mm,
but then later on, Iroh, despite being a great fatherly figure, also like had a lot of silly comedic moments. You know, typically tied to his obsession with tea and
mm.
just enjoying life and not being overly bogged down by like the mission and stuff. So that's one thing. And then how even the animal companions often played, of course, very well into the humor. I mean, Momo is your classic because, of
Mhm.
course, he's just in everyone's business. But even Appa had like very subtle comedic
Mm.
moments that I like. Um, yeah, Kenny agrees. Likes how the Ang Gang has to keep reminding everyone they're just kids. I mean, that's it. That they have this super super big mission. It's, oh my
Yes.
god, save the world. But then in the end, they're still kids, and they have to still deal with things on that level.
Now, Andre, of course, jokes. Technically, Ang is a senior citizen, but do you really age if you weren't living through the years of how old you should be?
Ooh,
The markings, however, on Ang do denote that he's a master when it comes to airbending. And um, gotta admit, it's a lot of tattoos you'll place on a young boy.
I know, right?
And I can only imagine how the greater story of that connects in the sense of considering there's such a pacifist nation. The act of doing those type of huge tattoos is part of that culture, and I
Mm-mm.
can, I would love to see more of that. I wish I could read more of that, and I don't know if it's already there, and I just haven't.
No, he's pointing to the comic, and I can say no. Okay, Noel just joined. No worries, Noel. I mean, like you're always welcome. Don't worry about the time, and then if you can always circle back and watch the beginning.
Now
Okay.
let's talk about Uncle Iroh. Uncle Iroh.
Or general.
So he was originally not written to be an uncle.
Okay.
Originally, he was just meant to be the firebending mentor for for Zuko.
Okay.
But then later on, it was changed. And then, though they are brothers, Iroh and the Fire Lord are never seen together again on screen. They were in the same room when Zuko spoke out of turn, but that's pretty much the only time they shared dialogue. Um,
To be fair, because for a lot of the series, we actually didn't see a lot of Fire Lord Ozai. He was
mhm.
always like a figure mentioned in flashbacks and stories and depicted far away, which is part of the mystique around him as villain.
Yeah.
But you didn't get a lot of interaction with him. I mean, it's like if I don't know why this is my first comparison, because if you think about Voltron and like how much we saw Prince Lothar,
Mhm.
and I can't remember now the name of the big bad guy. But we saw them almost every episode, right? Scheming and plotting together. But the literal distance that they kept between Zuko and Ozai told a story in itself, and it was this metaphor for the state of their relationship.
Stop! Noel just asked a question. We're talking about the animated version, right? Not the movie. What movie, Noel?
If you go over earlier into the comments on YouTube, there are those who say there is no
Um,
movie in Ba
the
Sing
only
Se.
movie I know about was the one with the blue skinned folk, but that's a different franchise altogether.
Mm-mm. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Um, so Jay says one of the best things about the series is how they tell the story. While it considered a kid show, it doesn't dumb itself down for the audience. Yes, we totally agree. Oh, and yeah, and then sites before Ozai was often literally shrouded in fire.
Mhm.
It was super hard to see him, which made the I guess the reveal a bit more impactful later on. And it's interesting that we went to like, hey, who do we want to voice this guy? They went Mark Hamill, right?
Mhm. Yes.
Why not? Because he has a rich history as a voice talent for the likes of the Joker.
So in terms of the later um, reveals of how far bending can go, because that was one of the things that was super cool when they did it in the show for the
Yes.
first few times. The other elements that can be bent include spirit, ice, plant, combustion, lava, metal, sound, blood, and lightning. I think online, if you look, there are even little nice charts that show these are the elements, and
And
then
then
these
the
are
sub
the
branches,
sub
yeah.
branches. This was interestingly, beautifully explored in the next series, Korra,
Mm.
because it nicely did feel like a let's see the progression of time and let's see how these sub skills have become refined to become a bit more common compared to before.
Mm-hmm. Jay continues on that when book three came out, the Day of Black Sun was huge because it was the first time we saw his Fire Lord Ozai's face.
Mm.
That's true. Noel also loves the progression of the seasons from very comedic kid show, then growing to a more matured audience. Ang galing. So yeah, over the course of the 3-ish years of the show, it grew up with the audience to some degree and
Mm-mm.
like increase those expectations. It still never quite lost its innocence and its light comedic moments and its slapstick humor. Um, but it's super worked out. I mean, okay, and then I guess that's why also one of my favorite episodes is when they watch the play based on themselves.
Yes, and I think that was referenced in Marvel movies
Mhm.
when Thor sees a similar
Yes, and
play.
I love that. And then because later on we were like playing things like Houses of the Blood, and then like it was really like, oh my god, it's theater, not opera, and it was just so fun. Um, and then it was slightly like disappointing to me at the time of release that what we're only getting 3 books, 3 seasons because you kind of wanted 4 because there's 4 elements.
Andre.
By Andre. But it makes sense because he already knew air,
Mm.
and then he didn't need a book about air, especially without an air nation to like explore. So the 3 season arc, was pretty tight though, and on its own, you could argue that it was surprisingly succinct, especially for American television, because they have a notorious habit of telling very long stories with very long seasons
Mm-mm.
and then not getting renewed midway so they don't get to finish the story. So that's a pain. The just 3 seasons in hindsight feels like it was a very good length. It was a they got to take Ang to a lot of
And
places.
it really forces you to write smarter when you know you
Yes.
have an ending. Um, in many ways, that's why a lot of the really good literature that we know of um, had distinct endings, and
Mm.
then later on they keep going because someone wants to make more. But you can tell that those were specific endings. Um, Neil Gaiman's Sandman had a specific ending in mind. Um, in some ways, Dune felt like it had a specific ending until
Until
someone
Herbert died.
until someone wanted to keep writing it based on notes rather than um, some would even dare say Game of Thrones. Um, the show might not have been as strange as it got had they just followed the books.
But they ran out of books, which is where things really
Yeah.
went off the rails. Okay.
Now, in terms of sequels, however, and Noel mentioned this earlier, Noel mentioned that Korra, which was the next show, felt like a letdown. I will admit, and we won't explore Korra so much here because we'll make it
We
a
think it
separate
needs
episode.
another episode,
But
yeah.
I will admit, I did have that same impression at first that
Mm.
the show's not as good as the original series, but it's because you're not supposed to take it as the same series. A large part of what made Korra interesting was that it was a different story altogether. In the same way, I think when you talk about Star Wars, the original trilogy, that's why Rogue One felt so nice compared to the other trilogies. Because it was now trying to tell a new story in
In
the
the Star
same
Wars
in the same
universe.
universe.
That's a good point. Okay. Nina was asking you for getting into the ships, and I guess you're not meaning the Fire Nation fleet. And I don't know. I don't know. We're trying.
No,
We're
but
not commenting too deeply into things
or
only
maybe I
because
think she's talking about shipping.
yeah, exactly. That's what
Okay.
I mean. I'm joking. But then but we also don't want to go too deep into character discussions only because we're like spoiler light in this for the
Yeah.
few people who still haven't seen this here, which is valid. There because it still came out like in the pre Netflix era. Then it wasn't something that people binged. At
And
most, it's what people bought on pirated DVD or
and
something.
then admittedly, I think that's the thing about how we do our show. We like it being a way for people to
Discover things.
consider trying something. So we don't want to preempt them as to why it was super awesome, but at least share enough information of why it was interesting.
Black Swan
Um,
has a funny story. He says some friends of his, and almost used Ember Island players as their team name for an Avatar themed trivia night, but they ended up not because they were sure everyone else would, which they did. So they were the Brave Soldier Boys,
mhm.
which I think still works. Okay. Um,
So what other elements do we can we talk about the show that we really liked? Um, the music was excellent. It knew when to pull back and be subtle. It knew when to go full strength. Um, the show wasn't a musical,
no,
not
but
like
it
other
kind of wanted to be at
yeah,
some points.
not like other cartoons wherein the musical numbers were inherently part of it. This one wasn't really in that regard.
But had beautiful scoring,
Hmm.
beautiful emotionally evocative scoring, which really worked. I think one thing I oh no, what was I gonna say? I was gonna say something. One I think is that uh, non-benders is
Hmm.
one thing I want to highlight first. In a world where you have such fantastical abilities, um, time and time again, they were still also able to depict that people without bending abilities
Hmm.
could still be awesome. And it was not limited to the primary cast. It wasn't just Soka. And
Yes.
you would get many acts of heroism by different characters who just wanted to do the right thing or maybe started out not doing the right thing and would come around. I mean, so there was a and I like that balance that
Hmm.
it didn't uh limited to only the people with superhuman abilities are going to get far in the world and hold positions of power. It was a rich world in that sense.
So Jay's sharing that he's actually watched the entire series more than 10 times already in three languages. So Jay is to Avatar what Noel was to Friends.
Maybe, but you need to watch it a fourth language so that you can truly master the story.
Because you've only mastered it in three languages so far.
You are not yet the avatar of watching Avatar. Okay.
That's a good one.
And then I think another great thing was their depiction of women.
Mm-hmm.
And although Qatar, Qatar in the beginning did have a strong tendency to be very sad and cry about things a lot, which was later on referenced within the show.
Mm-hmm.
But on the whole, there was a good mix of strong male and female characters on both sides of the fence, and how it showed that there was no limitations really, especially when it came to things like bending. And bending became like this big equalizer, really, that you could do anything on either side. Um, Jay plans to watch it in Japanese next. Oh, good for you. Okay. Um, All right. I like this age discussion. So only five of the IMDb sites, only five of the characters throughout the series have their age explicitly mentioned. Aang is 112, Zuko and Yue are 16, Toph is 12, Tom Tom, May's brother, is 2. It's also mentioned by Ty Lee that Mai is 15 years older than her brother, which would make her 17. Canonically, Mai is only 15 years old, which would mean Ty Lee's line is a writing error. Besides, Aang has at least two other characters are over 100 years old. Bumi, who knew Aang before he got frozen. Oh, and then Guru Pathik, who knew Monk Gyatso. Oh, interesting. Okay, so yeah, so age stuff is like very quirky. Chase, it made me tear bend. Okay, people they're quoting lines from the show already over on the YouTube side. We'll leave it at that.
So all three seasons opens on a boat.
That's interesting, but when I just saw like, oh nga no, all three all the opening moments are on a boat, and then I also will cite that what is it with hair growth and character growth, not just for Zuko, because even there is a point that Aang has to grow hair.
Well, when it comes to the medium, hair growth always means time passage.
That is true. It's age. It's
And
a visual
that's
way to
why,
depict age.
For rom-coms, beard growth is also time passage depression. Or
Yes.
You haven't been okay for some time, so now we have this and that. So yeah, that's there. Now, beyond just the
Black
series,
Swan is going to work. Bye
Bye,
as well. Take care.
it's because of that we won't hit 12. We were like so close. So there have been a number of books that have been published. Dark Horse Comics has published an art book called Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Art of the Animated
I
Series.
still haven't gotten this. I should have looked for this during
As
Big
far
Bad
as
Wolf or
comics,
something.
there are comics that were in the Nickelodeon magazine and Dark Horse. A number of them have been collected as well. As you can see here, you have
There are 5 in the main series.
Mhm.
So just for your reference, I brought them all out. Okay. So this one takes place immediately after the events of the show.
because it's meant to lead up to one of the questions in the show that was never answered.
Yeah, and then I guess, and I can go that far in saying that because it is the promise, it is basically trying to answer the question of, so where's Zuko's mom?
Mhm.
Which is like, oh my god, that's a strong thing. But it wasn't just a straight up continuation of their adventures. They actually go into a lot of effort to depict what's been happening. And to be fair, you've just had a massive upheaval in the power structure, so things aren't just going to go back to normal right away. I have the large print library edition, which I super super recommend because, and I'm looking for a decent example, and you can't quite see it well. Yeah, you
I'll
can't.
bring it close.
But there are marginal notes on the side from the creators of the show, so they highlight sort of what they were plotting
So it's
out
like
for the series.
It's like a commentary in a print medium.
Yeah. So, although scripting was done by other people and the like, but they they weighed in on like the story elements that were brought in, and it's not just the creators, but also the people who made the comic. So there is, and these started out as these weird magazine format, sold in like 3 4 issues, but they're compiled in really big volumes and fully booked. So you can get the Promise, which is followed by the Search, and I'll just mention the titles because they're quite evocative. And then Yes, that's Azula on the cover. And then there's the Rift, and you can interpret that as you will. um, ah, ah, and then Smoke and Shadow, and just looking at the character choices of who's there is interesting. And finally, there's the book, North and South, which of course directly references the water tribes, and yeah, and the oh my god, these are very very satisfying books to read. They do feel like a very vibrant and fully realized connection to the original cartoon, and then to have like the different creators comment on
We've
things.
hit 12! Yay!
Actually, it means it's 10.
Yeah,
Yay!
10 viewers. So beyond these comics, there are a bunch that were listed. Wikipedia lists a few, which is odd because I don't know now if they've been released because there's no links. There's, for example, um, Imbalance that's supposed to come after North and South. And then there's supposed to be a Legend of Korra one, which then sort of explores the emerging conflict between benders and non-benders.
I have one of those books.
There are prequel novel series as well. The first book being a book that covers the Avatar Kyoshi, the Rise of Kyoshi. The second one was supposed to be the Shadow of Kyoshi.
I haven't gotten that one.
Both are listed to have been released already, so it's odd that I'm not sure. Video games as well have there have been a number of video games that have been released. So Avatar: The Last Airbender had a video game back in 2006. Avatar: The Last Airbender: The Burning Earth was released in 2007. Into the Inferno 2008. Legends of the Arena, which was a massive multiplayer online role-playing game for the Windows, was released in 2008 as well by Nickelodeon. Um, there were a number of other guestings in different games, including Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 Grand Prix. Um, Now, recently there has been a bunch of new upcoming video games as well that feature various characters from different shows on a specific channel.
Hmm.
So we'll only have to wait and see if any of the Airbenders will appear there again.
I will cite though that if you want to find a really interesting book, there is this one which is Legacy, which is really a reference book more than anything, but it is written after the events or from the perspective of after the events of the original show. Um, with like, oh my god, look at this group photo, okay? And it basically will talk to you about different things. Like it talks to you about the water tribe, or it will talk about waterbenders and includes a pull-out chart of waterbending,
Mhm.
which is like really cool. And the whole thing is, oh, there's a
Careful.
yeah, it's like partly sticky, but that's okay. There is a whole poster of
The animals.
animals, including otter, penguins, koala, sheep, and of course, all these crazy things. So it's a nice little um, extra material, and the whole thing is pseudo written from the
Mhm.
perspective of Aang, and he writes it addressed to Tenzin. So it's a it's a gem. So it's not quite Korra. It's not quite the Last Airbender. And I know a lot of us, and I think that's like I guess a little tangent I can touch is that there's that desire to like you want to know more about adult Aang. And like
Yeah.
I mean we see the Avatar Airbender characters in Korra much older.
Mhm.
Well, some of them, but then like there's that whole period, that were when
It's like Jesus. We only know the childhood. We only know the miracles. We don't know his life.
Okay. Okay. And the comics do not answer that question. The comics, because they take place right after the show, they're all still Team Avatar. They're all
Mm.
still kids. So this one reference book like super depicts a lot of them in their adulthood, and it's kind of bonkers.
Now, supposedly there was going to be a live action series remake with the showrunners helming things, but sadly, as of August 2020, both showrunners have declared in social media that due to creative differences, they are separating from the project, and a new showrunner has taken the thing. As of February 2021, Avatar Studios has been launched, a new division of Nickelodeon centered on developing more content, whether it's series or films set in the Avatar universe. So, time will tell if this will be the next Star Wars in the sense of, all these different takes on the universe.
Mm-mm.
Maybe there'll be a show focused on the soldiers. Maybe there'll be a show focused on other groups, like maybe there are cults there, maybe there's a group all about the farming that's going on with all these dual animals.
If you're super fans of the Ember Island players, we got a poster for their work. I love this book. I love this little book. Okay.
In terms of tabletop games, officially, as mentioned at the start of the show, there is the Avatar: The Last Airbender role-playing game that's powered by the Apocalypse that's coming out soon. I believe it will be launching on Kickstarter. For those who want a similar game but don't have the patience to wait, you can look for Legend of the Elements, which is another powered by the Apocalypse role-playing game that's out there. If you want something that's much more meaty or much more hefty, but has also martial arts with elemental powers, then you could try stuff like Exalted or Weapons of the Gods, as well as Legends of the Wulin as options. Was there more information on the Kickstarter that you saw?
I don't know if it's going to Kickstarter or if it's just. I'm trying to
I sort of
remember.
recall reading it'll be on Kickstarter or launching on Kickstarter, but I could be wrong. The role playing game is supposed to be covering multiple eras, and it's supposed to be quite meaty, so that's quite exciting. In terms of tabletop games, there is what was it called? The elemental
The
bending,
pro
the
bending
pro
game,
bending arena.
but that's a Korra game
Yeah,
technically.
and it only plays for two players. You handle your team, and you go on matches against each other on an arena that pretty much matches the show. Cards are played to do special maneuvers, and different elements supposedly have different effects depending on how you approach it.
Yeah, so then if you want to explore into these things, at the very least, the Avatar Kickstarter, um, the Avatar Quick Start rules are out. It's a 55-page PDF that's kind of
Mhm.
beautifully done. That includes, I mean, and for people familiar with Power by the Apocalypse, it includes the basic system. It includes. Okay, I think we're back. Sorry about that. But if anything, it features and then like kind of mentioned earlier that the playbook archetypes, none of them are necessarily benders. They are personalities. They are types of
Yeah, you have the
people.
icon or you have the bold.
Yeah. So and then your character can have bending or doesn't need to have bending. It can be they just use technology or they just use martial arts. So it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool.
Mhm.
We haven't played it yet. We've only looked at it, but it looks quite promising, and it's being done by Magpie Games. Um, but Power of the Apocalypse is probably a good way to go. It's like a very easy framework for a system that people can jump into. It's very narrative and not too crunchy. And I'm generally optimistic about it. But we did play the other one,
Legend
the
of the Elements.
Legend of the Elements. That was very fun
Hmm.
too, and it was a good use of the apocalypse system again. And so many games are able to celebrate with the apocalypse, and I'm glad that that thing came
Yeah,
into
you're right.
being.
It doesn't seem to be Kickstarter. It might be just a
Just a
full release
release,
on
yeah.
2022.
They got cash money.
Well, again, with Avatar Studios, I guess there's a lot of funds going around.
Mm-mm.
They're also looking at two supplements to follow by August and Feb 2023, which includes Republic City and the Spirit World, respectively.
Interesting. Okay, Jay says one of the popular debates when he was in high school was whether or not you can consider Avatar as anime. Well, I do not consider it one because of technicalities. I think the discussion began because the only other animated shows that felt like in the same category as Avatar were anime. Um,
I guess that depends on how you define anime.
we always have this little discussion
Yeah.
every now and then.
It's sort of like, are things movies or films?
Mm,
Depends on how you define both.
yeah,
Because that's where the conflict always begins. In the end, words are words, and words adapt to how people use them. So,
yeah. Wow, that was succinct.
but that's how it is. Because I used to have that gripe as well of, why are people calling it anime? It's just an animated thing. But then I realized that's because, for some people, anime is anything that's animated. For other people, it's not. But then people forget that when you just say, just because you say, anime is something, that's made in Japan, but they're not all made in Japan. They sometimes outsource animation to
To
countries
Korea.
like the Philippines and Korea.
Yeah.
So, you know. Anyway,
Ooh. Ooh.
it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's complicated that way. What else? Is there anything else that we will want to cover? Do you want a live action movie to still come out?
No. Okay, I'm scarred by the last attempt. And like I feel like and I feel like so much of the show um just worked best on animation.
Mm-hmm.
And then like because a lot of the fantastical world building was more easily celebrated to animation down
Mm-hmm.
to like the hybrid animals and whatnot. If you need to do it with as a live action feature, then it's going to be a very CGI heavy
Mm-hmm.
live action feature, and then I don't know how it's gonna go. And we already saw how stupid it can look, so I think I'm okay no more.
I'm of the camp where, as long as it's new stories.
That's another good point.
For
Like I
example,
don't need a retelling of the TV
yeah,
show.
and I mean, so like we love the Expanse right now.
Mm.
I wouldn't want to see an Expanse animated series, but
Mm.
if it were an Expanse setting new animated series, I'd be interested.
So it's like the Animatrix, but for the Expanse.
Yeah, yeah, why not? I mean,
Mhm.
if it's new stories, if it's new characters, if it's new explorations. So same thing here. If it's the retelling of their stories, I would not want to see it. But if it's new takes on the universe, then by all means, give me that live action show. I want to see how cool they'll make it, because that allows you to have more excitement. It doesn't have you comparing, and it's not a are you doing it right. It's more a how will they do it, how will
Mm.
they approach it.
Kenny asks, "Would you like to see a new Avatar series with a new Avatar?" And I think I will squirrel around this and say I don't think that's the right question to ask based on like how the creators are. If they have another story to tell and they can use an avatar as a vehicle for that story, then I'm okay.
But wouldn't that mean it's always a new avatar? Because the only avatars we know are Korra and Aang, and in some ways the ones that made very brief appearances in the show,
It
like
makes it
Kyoshi.
generational, yeah.
So, your question, Kenny, of a new avatar, do you mean after Korra, or do you mean
Continuing adventures of
some new avatar we haven't seen before? Because if that's the question, then I wouldn't mind, because the show's called Avatar. Then of course you want an avatar to be somewhere in the show. It doesn't always have to be the same type of a journey. Hell, I'd love to see one whole series where it's all about an avatar trying to have dates, and failing because everyone's like, "Oh my God, you're the avatar."
and I give me I only I my answer was my answer only because I felt like because Ang's journey is a complex one where it's him trying to grow up, him trying to accept responsibility of what his role as the avatar, and then finding a solution to the problem facing the world that does not compromise his principles and beliefs. And it's a difficult question. Whereas in Korra, it was this exploration of the world of trying to balance um, the mundane world of people, but then also the spirit world. And I think that was like the central thing about the avatar's role of bringing balance. So each show so far has been a very interesting exploration of a concept.
Yeah.
And so I don't just want another avatar cartoon for the sake of an avatar cartoon. If the creators feel like they have something to bring to the table, something else, some other idea that they want to look into, then whether it is a past, present, future avatar, then I'm all for it. Because they've already demonstrated themselves to be great storytellers. But I feel like that's the question. Like what else is there to explore in this world?
So Jay does share. He would like to see more previous avatars because in the 10,000 years after the first avatar, there are so many stories left untold.
Mm-hmm.
Tom mentions Avatar, the gender bender. I'm not quite following. I guess a more transgressive type of avatar concept would be an interesting thing to explore, but I don't quite get um, how, unless it's just like a homage to Ranma One Half. Um, what else? So we talked about the possibilities of the show.
Because at least they get one sequel series, and that sequel series followed the same 3 season arc, which was okay. Although it struggled to get to the end because the ratings were just not the same.
Now, admittedly, Korra did try to tell a more mature storyline.
That is true.
Sorry, let me rephrase that. Because Ang did have a mature storyline. Korra tried to tell a more adult storyline. It tried to talk more about sexuality. It tried to talk more about relationships and all this and that. Because Avatar: The Last Airbender did touch on those, but did not super focus on it. Whereas in Korra, we were very close to the "so who does she love"
Yeah.
as a main story plot point.
There were a lot of love triangle.
Now this
To the
leads to my
structure.
next question, and that is, um, if ever, well, as we know, there is the Avatar Studios that's been set up, and they are planning to release
Something.
more stuff coming out. Um, do you see any interest in more adult-oriented Avatar stories? So it's no longer intended for kids.
Parang no also. Maybe, and this is, I think I'll need to see it.
Mhm.
Like, I can't just accept it on the premise, but I will admit that so much of the show's charm is how it balanced that element and managed to still reach out to kids and adults. And
'Cause-
so
'cause I
I
guess
still want to see that.
One thing I could say is Marvel Cinematic Universe as an example, or even the Ultimates as an example, wherein you got your usual superhero stories, but then you gave it, in the case of Ultimates, an edgier approach to realism. In the case of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a more realistic reinterpretation of what was in many ways still the same concepts. You still had the super soldier who was stuck in ice and all this and that. But then, let's change the spandex with something that looks closer to armor and ganyan. So in some ways, that movie that we will never mention might have tried to do that, but just failed miserably.
So I don't, yeah, and then I don't, and I don't have a logical, argument for it.
Mhm.
I just I feel like so much of the show is tied to that innocence and whimsy, and to completely turn their backs on it, I don't know.
Then,
I would have to see it.
then opposite end of the spectrum, similar to Thundercats, with the super zany younger version.
Well, we haven't officially seen it, so it's like a little unfair to compare. But I mean, I get that. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not super into it in concept. In the same thing, like how it's like the difference with what's this? Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go.
Yes.
Like, I tried as much as like it's a lot of like similar voice talents, and maybe some of the stories are kind of the same, but
Hmm.
I can't I can't endure too much Teen Titans Go. It's too much. It's too much for me. So um or like not enough, ironically is the way to
Hmm.
say it. So I don't know. And this may be the power of nostalgia working. Like I don't want them to touch Avatar in that sense and go too far in either direction. I
Hmm.
like where it is. I like the challenge they presented themselves with trying to tell stories to such a wide audience. Um, how do you answer those questions?
Um, I'm not super attached to the franchise,
Okay.
so I'm still more open minded to seeing what directions they'll take. Um, Seeing a grittier, more serious one for me sounds interesting, only because um, elemental magic, and let's say it's a war story. Let's say it's just basically about a regiment in the deep in the war, and the entire series will be the war, and it might be just focused on how they fight, you know tanks and stuff and the like. Or maybe it's a group of soldiers and none of them are benders and all their enemies are benders.
Welcome to the Clone Wars.
Diba? So it'd be something like that. Would be interesting. In terms of the opposite end of the spectrum, we're in, we suddenly have My Little Avatar or something like that, um, where they're now all kindergarten, and um, maybe it would be interesting. But I think the only time I'd find that interesting if the focus were on baby animals. Like maybe it's one of the avatars who was literally an avatar at age 4, and like the rest of the cast is like 7 different hybrid animals as his companions.
I don't know. I think you're just being Toby and regurgitating, just not regurgitating, but just throwing out, vomiting all these ideas. So, in the end, it's I guess it boils down to execution, and to be fair, it'll boil down to the story they want to tell. It feels like such a cop out to go in this direction, but only because I love. I guess that it just kind of comes around that what I love the most about Avatar is the fact that it had such a good story to tell, and uh, then like I feel like regardless of treatment
Mhm.
and styling, I mean that's all decoration. Ultimately, it's what story are they gonna tell,
Mhm.
and so it makes it a little harder for me to appreciate other things. When that's how I think about it, that I want them to have a good story. So yeah,
So I guess to wrap up, Jay does mention there were shorts where they're shown as chibi
yeah.
characters, and that's always fun. Jed mentions Prometheus alien filter still on. It's the camera. We can't seem to figure out how to make adjustments on it without downloading new software. But we are using a two light system now, with one of them being a warmer light to try to add some color. It's not yet working completely. We don't have a staff. Um, and then beyond that, I think that's it. I think we've covered everything. We'll try to cover the pro bending arena game in an episode in the future. I
Yeah.
realized we could have made it an Avatar week just for the heck of it. The board game and on Monday, maybe some elemental related something for food on Tuesday.
Yeah,
Could have,
we would have needed a full week. We didn't have a full week this week.
but we really didn't think of it. It was just really, hey, let's try that, and then let's talk about this because we're really looking at exploring fandoms every Thursday.
Mm-mm.
Yes, Jed, that's what we are super weirded out about. That the flag is like beautifully colors. So, like, I don't know. Is it because we're too close to the camera? Is it? I don't know. It's very odd.
It's very weird. But then we've like we watched a video with someone else with the same camera, and he seems to have the same like super light tone because it has whatever adapted. It is designed to work better with low light, and then
Nope, that
um,
didn't like change things.
to be fair, focus is not our problem. At
Yeah,
least when we look at it
at least
on
we
our
look sharp
monitor, it
now.
looks sharper than the old camera. So that's fine. It's just the lighting. Jay would want to guest on the core episode. Oh, we can consider it. Yeah, just let us
Okay, that
know
sounds that sounds
what
good.
scheduling works better for you, and then we figured it out. So yeah, because we're typically doing these fandom things on Thursdays, but
Mhm.
then like if you want to push that to like a weekend episode, we can. Let's talk. Let's talk. That's basically the statement there. Okay, Toby, any last items, thoughts that you want to bring up about? Avatar: The Last Airbender.
No, but tomorrow our Friday episode will be about Kilig Happy Moments. We're talking about rom coms and similar movies, shows, series, etc. Maybe even commercials for all we know. And Sunday we will actually have a Sunday episode, and it's about theme parks, the places that we enjoyed, the
Yeah.
places we missed, the places we're anxious to visit. So we hope you'll join us again on those dates. But as of tonight, we had a lot of fun, and we hope you'll join us again next time.
Yeah. So for questions or suggestions for future episodes, you can fill up the Google form at bit.ly Baduy Pride Ideas. You can follow us on Twitter, all Toby No Shade, RG Suniko.
You can also check out our blog, baduypride.com, for all the previous episodes and stuff about us.
Feel free to continue the conversation in the comments below and let us know what are your best memories of this particular show. Have you also read the comics with me? I don't have anyone to talk to them about this. The story is really good. So much so now bringing them out makes me want to reread them. Anyway, and be sure to subscribe for notifications, whether on Facebook or YouTube, so you don't miss our next live stream. Once again, I'm Rocky.
Name to be.
And this is Baduy Pride. Good night, everyone.